Hello there, welcome to my YouTube channel. I thought today that I would show you a Marconiphone Model T69DA from the early to mid 1960s that came into the workshop here faulty. There wasn't a sound coming out of it, it was dead as a dodo. So the fault mainly was that one of the valves didn't have any voltages HT going to it. One of the resistors feeding HT to the valve was open circuit, so that was a simple fault. I like the set. I like the look of it. It's a typical 1960s design, and I thought, well, I would renovate it for the customer. He didn't actually ask for it to be renovated, but it was a good project. So I'm showing you this video just to show you what can be done to these sets for fairly minimal outlay. Um, the main problem with the set, apart from being dead, was that it was in an awful physical condition. The grill here was the paint was flaking off all over the place, and underneath it was black, so it just looked like bits of black all over it. So that needed respraying with some ivory coloured paint from Halfords. I think Ford Ivory, yes, Ford Ivory was used, and the face plate down here was also sprayed. Masking tape, put masking tape around the edge here, and then spray it. The control knobs were taken off and cleaned, and the brass inserts here were also polished. They've come up quite well. One of the other faults on the set was that I think you can see that the dial lights isn't very bright. One of the faults was that one of the bulbs had gone, and they're quite hard to get hold of these days. They're little, I think they're called MES, if my memory serves me, MES type bulbs, screw-in type. And the bulbs on this one were 12 volts at 100 milliamps. For you technically minded people, that's important on these types of sets, because if you put a higher rating bulb in, um, it just doesn't work. It hardly lights at all. It won't light up. Even though you put the correct voltage bulb in, it's the current rating that's important. There's a reason for that, which I don't think I'll go into. A bit complicated and technical. One of the things about these sets was in the 1960s, FM radio had been going about 10 years. And there weren't that many stations on the FM bands in the FM band in those days, and so this receiver only went up to receiving 100 or 101 megahertz. And if you look down here and wait for the camera to focus, you can see there it is there, VHF FM megacycles as it was known in those days, and their 101 was the top end. So that meant that down here in Cornwall, where I live, anyway, you could not receive the local commercial radio station, which is called Pirate FM. You could not receive the local BBC Radio Cornwall station, and you couldn't receive Heart radio either. So the whole set needed to be what we call detuned inside. So I managed to detune it to get and receive Pirate FM on 102.2. That's the local frequency for Pirate FM, 102.2. And it meant that everything down at the bottom end, all the stations down here on 88 megahertz, all those would probably drop off the end and not be received at that end. So if I detuned it further up the band to receive all the upper band frequencies, right up to Heart, it meant that I wouldn't be able to receive BBC Radio 2 down here, which is at 88.5 88.9 megahertz on our local transmitter. So it was a compromise. Anyway, I did that, and that's a great improvement on what it was before. That's it. Cameras focused in now. So that was quite a bit of a project to do. Having had to change a couple of valves, there was noise, horrible. It was 50 hertz mains hum. It was a hum coming out of it on the VHF band, and I couldn't find out. I just didn't know why. I tested everything, and it was just something I just couldn't work out. And I thought, well, I'll change the frequency, what we call the frequency changer valve, which is a UCH81, for another one, thinking it might be the valve, and it was. So that meant changing the valve meant all the characteristics inside the set were all altered, and so it had to be completely what we call realigned. So the set was realigned, and the RF and the IF circuits, that's the radio frequency circuits, and the intermediate frequency circuits were all retuned and peaked and realigned so that the set sounds perfect. So that was another big issue with the set, a labour of love, as we say. So what I also had to do, the set was in a terrible condition. The case was, as you can see now, it looks quite nice. The outer cabinet was painted with some burgundy paint, burgundy coloured paint, and it was horrible, all scratched. So I completely took the paint off. I used a cloth and um, some special chemical stuff to get rid of the paint, some thinners, cellulose thinners. I had to be very careful that I didn't upset or destroy this Bakelite case cabinet, and I didn't. It came out nice, and I wax polished it. I think you agree that that looks superb as it is. So I didn't bother to respray it with burgundy paint. Apart from that, I don't think I would have made a very good job of it, because I would have had to mask all of this with masking tape and all of this, and all. Big job. No, I think it looks very nice as it is, polished. So that was another bit of the job that was a labour of love. I'll just turn this around, show you the back. One of the things that the radio stations, the FM stations in the 50s and 60s, they were all, the transmitter was all the aerial stuff. The stations, the main FM stations in the 50s and 60s, the aerials were all horizontally polarized, so that the aerial had to be out like that to receive the station properly. When there was an increase in FM stations through the 70s and 80s, there would be what we call co-channel interference between one main station and another, and then local radio came in and had to be fitted in the band, and they all started to interfere with would have interfered with each other if the local radio stations weren't polarized in the vertical position. So the aerials in the local radio transmitters for local area were all, the aerials, all of the aerials were polarized in the vertical position, and all the main transmitting stations down here is Redruth and Carradon Hill in Cornwall, were all polarized in the horizontal position, and there's a great difference in reception between vertical and horizontal. So that's why this aerial was fitted, so that you could just move the set, the aerial, rather than have to keep twisting the set around to get the stations to come in clearly. Excuse me, the ferret rod aerial is. So there it is, not ferret rod aerial, I keep saying that, it's telescopic aerial. saying that, there is a ferret rod aerial. It's a sort of, it's got it's a rod in the back. You can't see it. Let me turn the set round and I'll show you what I mean. Down in here, there is what we call a ferrite rod or ferret rod aerial. Not ferret as in animal, it's a ferrite rod, and it has windings on it. And part of the aligning procedure is to move the coils along the ferret, slide the coils along the ferret rod aerial. Perhaps I should have taken the back off to show you what I mean. And one of the problems was on long wave, this set didn't work, and it was broken wires on the ferrite rod aerial. So that was another fault. And also this this one, the volume control, the usual thing was it was scratchy, and it stopped working up the top end. It was absolutely awful top end. It just didn't work. So that was replaced. I have a whole box load of them that I've kept over the years. So that was replaced. And there it is. I don't think there's much else to be said about the set, except that the construction of it is a typical 1960s printed circuit board. All the valve bases are inserted into the printed circuit board, which is etched and designed manually, not by a computer. There weren't CAD, what we call CAD designs in those days. There were no computers capable of designing printed circuit boards. So it all had to be designed manually. And then what they would do is they would have this copper-clad board, which was chucked in some etching ferric chloride, which would etch away at the copper and leave, if you masked the printed circuit, the wiring, or the design of the wiring, if you masked it with masking tape and then etched it, you would then end up having, printed circuit board wires on the printed circuit board, and the ferric chloride would then etch all the other bits out away and clean it off. So then that's how they made these printed circuit boards in those days. They were very slow on the uptake, even though printed circuit boards had been invented many, many years ago, right at the turn of the last century. The actual commercial use of printed circuit boards didn't really come into its own until the 60s and 70s. So Marconi company used designs that were similar in the 1950s, and the valve lineup of this set is the U series valves, and they were unusual in respect that the valve heaters, the things that make the valves work, were not of the typical 6.3 volts. They were 48 volts, 16 volts, all different voltages, anything other than 6.3 volts. And that was because these sets were designed to be AC or DC operated, meaning it wasn't a isolating transformer inside. There was no mains transformer in these sets, because they costed a lot of money, copper, and they wanted to make these sets at a cheaper price. So they designed these sets to have a dropping resistor inside, and in this case, the dropping resistors were all the valves plus the dial lamps. So it's like a Christmas tree. You take one of the lamps out of these old-fashioned Christmas tree lights, and all the lights would go out, and that would be the same here. If one of the valves went, the heater went, blew up, then the set would be dead, and there would be no lights on the dial lights at all or anything. So these U series valves were used because of the design features of it, for cheapness, actually, really. Anyway, I took a liking to this set, and I just wanted to show you what can be done with an outlay of £50. You can make these sets, bring them up to scratch, and make them new, and they can be sold on eBay. This one perhaps for £80, £90 maybe, and it's worth the time and effort, I think. Hope you agree, and I hope you enjoyed listening to this.